Hey, everybody. Welcome to Ag Advocates. I'm your co-host, Adam Cornish, and we've also got Paul Harrison on the line. Um, this is our second recording, and we're so excited to talk with you about things. One thing we realized we didn't do in the first episode was talk about who we are or why you should be listening to us. So that's what we're going to start off with, and then we'll talk about a couple of things in the news. But let's go over to you, Paul. What brought you over to agriculture, huh?
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, what brought me to agriculture? I didn't have a choice in agriculture, I guess. I was born on a hobby farm in southern Illinois. I didn't think of it as a hobby farm at the time, but once I got to AGP, Ag Policy Office at State, and I started getting out to Iowa and seeing really large farms, it was explained to me that I grew up on a hobby farm. And so, where we had, cows, horses, goats, all that stuff. But that's what started me on that. And then coming to Agriculture Department of State, it was an opportunity to lead an office and a really good team and get out and do some positive stuff. So I kind of jumped at it, and kind of for me it was kind of coming full circle since I'd started on a farm in southern Illinois.
Yeah, so for folks who don't know, you were the director of the Office of Agricultural Policy at the U.S. Department of State. When did you come in? And what was it like, jumping over? Because you were doing foreign cybersecurity stuff, I believe. What was it like
Yeah.
jumping over to into ag? And like it was probably quiet, right? There was nothing going on. You didn't have much to do.
So yeah, I a foreign service officer with Department of State, right? My first day of work with the department was September 10th, 2001. So I joined wanting to serve my country and see the world because I had a lot of, uncles, few aunts who had, served in the military. But that really wasn't, you know, I'm not that accurate with firearms. So I decided to focus on diplomacy and, joined the State Department, served around, did a lot of NATO work, national security work and stuff, worked with Air Mobility Command and all. Came to agricultural policy from the cyberspace and digital security policy world at State, working on 5G and telecommunications security and all that kind of things, right? But foreign service officers, we bounce around a lot. Was given the opportunity to come over to AGP and take on agricultural policy because they needed a new office director at the time, and we're looking for somebody who they had confidence in. They seemed to have confidence in me. I appreciate that, and was really glad to make that jump, which was September of 2022. I think I came on board actually in October of that year. And going out with you to the Convention on Biological Diversity there up in Montreal was one of the first things that we did, and I was lost, completely. And I did uh, in grad school, I did dissertation work on the endangered species trade and the CITES convention and all that kind of stuff, right? So, I mean, it's not a world that I'm unaware of, but man, working in the Convention on Biological Diversity, where the U.S. has decided not to be a member state, so how do we influence nations, and what are we trying to influence them on, and how do we get them to do what is in our interest and actually think, right? Because um, you know, God bless them, right? But like the Convention on Biological Diversity and so many of the others are like, oh, let's do good. Okay, that's not always right, you know. So, we need to balance stuff, right? And I mean, you were really helpful explaining to me there a lot of our concerns on how it impacted on the biotechnology realm and the ability to feed people around the world, help crops adapt to climate change and all that, and the unintended consequences of trying to do good sometimes,
Yeah.
or just trying to do wrong too. I mean, people try to do wrong also, but just in those multilateral fora, sometimes good ideas aren't the right ideas, and so especially when you don't belong, how do you deal with that? So I really, jumped right in on that and appreciated your, really taking me by the hand and show me how that, help put all that together there. And then after that, picking up on the trade and the biotech advocacy and all the various other elements of what we did there in ag policy. New World screwworm, God bless, fertilizer trade. I mean, we covered a lot of ground, and it was never a dull moment, right? You never knew when the assistant secretary was going to come in asking, I need this analysis, I need it immediately, or we got to go brief the secretary on something, because nobody else in the department had any idea about New World screwworm, foot and mouth disease, any of these kind of biological threats, right? I mean, they get them, they don't know the difference between swine fever and African swine fever, right? I mean, you know,
Yeah,
always
I
challenge
mean,
it. So having the expertise and being able to provide the analysis to folks so they can make better decisions was
yeah,
really
and I
good.
mean, what you're really focusing on here is like the work that our shop was doing related to animal and plant disease, which is super important and vital, especially national security threats, because agriculture is the lifeblood of the United States. But I mean, let's also note that our office was focused on really important trade issues as well, and the political implications thereof. I
Well,
really the way I thought about our office was we were like a connective tissue to USDA, so that USDA and state were talking with each other well, and because USDA might have particular things that they're trying to advance and push on, not necessarily always understanding what the national security components might be or the political constraints. And so, I mean, like, think about Paraguayan beef, right?
exactly.
Yeah, where I mean, you can talk about it better than I can, but essentially, we really wanted to see if we could have a deal with the Paraguayan government, mainly with APHIS on the US side, so that we could accept or certify that Paraguayan beef could come to the US. That's not because they wanted to send it to us, but because they wanted that golden seal of approval from USDA. Once they had
Yeah,
that, then they could export practically anywhere they wanted. The issue being, USDA, APHIS, they weren't taking action on it quickly enough. And we really wanted them to, because if we didn't say yes to their beef, then China was going to. And that would mean the if that would mean all of South America would have their trade, they would have some kind of thing uh
they'd
tied to
recognize
China.
China over Taiwan, right?
Yes,
And
that's what it
so,
was. Thank you.
and that was the challenge, right? How do you help? And you saw as soon as they got that USDA certification there on the ability to export to the United States, they started exporting tens of millions of dollars worth of beef to Saudi Arabia, right? Because
Hmm.
so many countries around the world rightly recognize the USDA stamp of approval as the gold standard, right? So
Yep.
that made a huge difference for them. Caused all kinds of headaches, right? Once it was granted, because beef cattlemen and other folks were quite concerned, as they had been for years. But there, those kind of things happen. I do think, like in our discussions with USDA and with U.S. agriculture and all, and recognizing national security impacts, that reliance on China for so much, right? And granted, we should sell them what they want to buy, right? We should be selling tens of millions of bushels or metric tons of soybeans, corn, all the chicken feet they want to buy, we should sell them, right? Absolutely. But when we become dependent on China as the market and we don't develop alternatives, either like on biofuels, right? So we've got domestic demand or on other international markets, then we've got a problem because they've got leverage. And we saw that, right? We saw that in the first Trump administration with the trade war. We saw that now in the second Trump administration with the trade war, right? China exerts their influence by cutting off, trade, specifically where they want, to bring pain to people they believe are, president's supporters, right? So, and they're amazing in how they do it. Their analysis goes down county by county level on exports, right? And specific, plants and everything. So, those are the kind of things where you've got to be, having a full interagency conversation. I was always glad we could get a seat at the table and talk about that. Things like Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States and concerns there too, right? And seeing a bigger picture and helping folks understand the threats. It's a lot of different things that we did, and so it was never a dull moment, and always, I think, fairly good value for the U.S. taxpayer. At least I hope so. And did what we could to further things along, both on the trade side and the national security side.
Yeah. Well, it's unfortunate. I mean, what you're referring to, Paul, is our office was part of a reduction in force from reorganization of the State Department last year. And so I feel for the folks at both at state and at USDA that are missing that intermediary office. And, maybe there'll be a choice further down the line that that office needs to be reestablished or something similar. I'll just give my background very briefly. I'm like Paul, I'm from the Midwest, Michigan, and my backyard was literally a cornfield. I didn't work in it, but I did toil in a single acre of garden that my grandmother had in her backyard every summer. So that gave me some appreciation for the soils. And then I completed my bachelor's and my PhD at Michigan State University, a land grant agricultural college. And although ultimately my PhD studies weren't in horticulture or agriculture itself, I did spend a fair amount of time monkeying with plants of various sizes and shapes, trying to make sure that they could grow better. Um, I eventually found my way to the Office of Agricultural Policy as a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow. And then our dear deputy director made a mistake, pressed the wrong button, and hired me. And so that was back in 2019, and I exited the office with Paul back in 2025. My main role once we left was as the lead for biotechnology and innovation. And as Paul mentioned, I was the U.S. focal point for something called the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, which we'll keep it real short. It's just a treaty that tries to ensure that the use of GMOs doesn't cause problems to biological concert diversity. And I think that's what you were really alluding to about that meeting we had in Montreal, which is at the end of the day, their entire goal is trying to protect biodiversity and aren't always necessarily thinking about the knock-on impacts of that. And so, as a non-party member to the both the convention and the protocol, it was really my job to try to have conversations about what party goals were and try to ensure that they knew that a single word change in a particular decision could have really big implications for how these products are regulated. And so at the end of the day, um, I want to make sure that we have tools that are both most effective in the hands of farmers here in the US and also elsewhere. And of course, if other countries implement really harsh regulations, that has problems for our farmers because then they don't have anywhere to sell their products to. So
Exactly.
it was thrilling, interesting work, and I'm really glad to be following it even today. Um, but let's go back to some well, now that we've introduced ourselves just a little bit, Paul, we've got some things that are on the international landscape that are coming up, um, such as it looks like the EU might actually finalize the EU-US trade deal that was started last year. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I hope they finalize that so that we can stabilize things. But I think they're waiting on, what's the administration response to the Supreme Court ruling that invalidated the president's initial tariffs, right? So they are, and rightly so, right? I mean, the EU made a number of concessions. I think that deal, when you look at it, is pretty favorable to the United States, which is good, for us. But I don't think we're getting necessarily. I don't think they're in a place where they can give more, right? So they're going to want that deal. They're going to want to know that that deal is what the administration can live up to too now. And so I think they've taken their time. They took a pause on ratification on it. They'll want to see that we're able to live up to it.
I mean,
And I
it's
don't
just
I
that
don't
they've
know
been
how
dragging their
that's going to play
heels,
out.
right? They've been
I'm
dragging their
sorry.
heels on it.
They're dragging their heels. We don't know what we're doing. I mean, it's everybody, right? So yeah.
Yeah.
I, you could say they're dragging their heels, but at the same time, I don't think we've given them the clarity that they need to be able to approve it at this point. So
Well, I mean, they're dragging their heels because, they know that they're looking for other options, right? They just got done signing a few weeks ago a trade deal with Australia. They're working on a trade deal with Mercosur. I think
they've got
the
that. Yeah.
yeah. So they know that the U.S. is a volatile place where what is signed one day isn't necessarily relevant the next. So yeah, they want to work on some kind of terms with us, but at the end of the day, they don't want to be dependent on our imports anymore, right?
Well, I think Europe wants a strong trade relationship with the United States, but they want clarity on it, right? And they aren't getting that at the moment. There's a lot of uncertainty, just like U.S. businesses face a lot of uncertainty on the tariff policy, right? I mean, U.S. businesses is in a challenged environment right now, especially on the manufacturing side, but also on like the small business side. You can't make decisions on hiring because you don't know what kind of profit margin you're going to have because you don't know what kind of tariffs you're going to pay and what the costs are going to be on stuff, and how you're going to be able to split that. So you see these real impacts right now. Um, and agriculture is facing the same thing, right? There's uncertainty, right? The war with Iran has driven up fertilizer prices, which further squeezes margins for farmers, right? Right now, corn is selling a lot because we're crushing a good bit and we're crushing a lot of soybeans. But what's that look like going forwards, right? We're supposed to have lower corn numbers for next year in terms of acreage, right? By about 4 million or so. So there's still going to be a lot of corn, and the efficiency goes up every year. So we may have more corn on less acres next year than we had this year. Soybeans probably going to plant more acres. They'll be more efficient too, so there'll be more soybeans. So what's going to happen going forwards, right? Margins are going to get further compressed. Price is probably going to drop. So, and everybody's got to pay higher interest rates too because there's no people are dumping U.S. Treasuries right now. So.
Yeah. Well, what are our farmers to do in this particular case? The Europe market is one we really can't lose at this point, especially with the concerns over China sales. How can we, either our trade associations or individual farmers, have some way to communicate that that they have high quality products that, really should be going across the Atlantic.
Yeah, well, I think the farmers have to do, what they're good at, which is hitting up their representatives and ensuring that their elected representatives are aware of the impacts and the needs, the benefits of trade, right? So look at like hog production, right? So we export what, like 40% of a hog, right, goes overseas. It's a phenomenal amount, right? Because we don't want a big chunk of that animal in the United States, right? We want the ribs, we want the tenderloin, we want the hams, but we don't want the legs, the jowls, the ear. So much of it we just don't want, right? But there are markets for it around the world, and exporting it is basically the profit margin when you slaughter a hog, right? So same thing with chicken, same things with cattle, right? All these things we produce, and then you've got all the grains, right? We produce a lot more than we can consume, so we've got to export. We need those markets. Europeans are glad to buy our stuff, even with the biotechnology, arguments that we have with them. They're still glad to buy a lot of American product. Look at what happens with bourbon, whiskey, right? They buy billions of dollars worth, right? But when we have a trade war with them, that drops and really dries up and hurts U.S. producers. And so now you see, a lot of the U.S. producers cutting back on their inventory and their production because they're just declining, sales volumes. Same thing with corn and soybeans, right? We've got to have those export markets. And Europe's a good place to go. U.S. wheat, a lot of it goes to Europe, right? But we need to keep those markets open and those lines of trade flowing for the benefit of U.S. agriculture. If we don't do that, then we're going to have fewer U.S. farmers. We're going to have less profitability. And, farmers and trade associations got to get out there and talk to their representatives, push on that. They got to push on the White House. And they do that, right? You saw the White House host an event a couple weeks or about a week ago or so for, National Ag Week, right? And they hosted a nice event there at the White House, had lots of folks. Not a lot of excitement in terms of announcements, right? I mean, they basically carried on the Biden administration's E15 decision, which was a carry on of the Trump administration's E15 decision, which was a carry on of the Obama administration's E15 decision. I mean, it's going back like 9 years at this point, or 10 years or something like that, right? On the E15 for summer, but no real breakthrough, right? So it didn't really move the markets. But we are crushing a lot, right? And moving forwards. And there are positive developments. They really got to hammer things home if they want to have that long-term sustained success and get away from the bailouts and all that just kind of keep things moving along at a
Yeah.
basic
Well, I mean,
pace.
well, talk about the bailouts and having that sustained pressure on representatives. I mean, there's a meeting in May coming up for between President Trump and Xi Jinping. And I know that soybeans are going to be on the discussion there. Already, Julie Callahan, USTR Ag trade representative, has been going to Beijing on repeated trips, talking about individual commodities that they that really need to have a focus. But where do you see that even going? Are we, the China has demonstrated over the last year how much outsized influence they have on the soybean market, especially for the U.S. What can we actually see happen from this? And because from my perspective, they have us over a barrel.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of the meeting, I'm not actually sure that'll happen.
Okay.
They've already postponed once. If the war with Iran is still going on, it the, the Chinese weren't thrilled with our lack of serious preparation for the visit. They expressed that, which
Hmm.
is pretty unique, right? They usually don't say anything like that, but that came out and was clear. So that must mean they were pretty irritated with our preparation for the summit. Then we launched the war with Iran that causes a lot of problems for them, creates a lot of opportunity for them as well internationally, but it causes a lot of problems with because they get so much of their fuel, gas and oil out of the Persian Gulf. Um, but I think that if there's not some kind of forward momentum on resolving the Iran war, or if it's not resolved by then, it may be postponed again. All right. Um, the Chinese are not itching for us to come visit. All right. They're glad to have it, but they're not itching. They don't need it. Right.
Yeah.
Um, and so they aren't gonna, if the Iran war is still going on and diesel is $6 a gallon and gas is $5 a gallon here, they are not gonna roll out the red carpet to bail us out because it isn't a benefit to them. So there's that. I think that in terms of China's, sorry, can you restate what you wanted on China? You were asking about, China's got us over a barrel, right? In many regards, because they are such a large consumer of soybeans, right? And this year we're selling them basically a little over a third of what we would normally sell them, right? And we're calling that a victory, which it's not. Um, we've got to diversify markets, right? We've got to diversify uses for soybeans, which is why like maritime diesel is important. Biofuels are really important, and we've got to be able to crush the soybeans, use the oil for biofuels, and then take the crush and use it for feed and ship that around the world, right? We need China to buy soybeans because there is no replacing them, but we need to cultivate other markets as well, and we haven't done enough of that because we've had such a huge market in China. And that was,
Hmm.
the point we constantly made back in the day working at state, right? Was we've got a dependency here where they've got leverage, right? I mean, we looked at the 2024, 2025 situation as opposed to the 2018 situation, and we were more dependent on them for an export market than they were dependent on us for imports than previously, right? So we had less leverage this time around than we had the last time we had a trade war with them.
Yeah.
So,
And I
and
just don't
that's
see us
fun
having,
today.
unless a bunch of markets magically appear that are going to be able to make up for that deficit. I don't see us getting that advantage back in any way.
No, I don't
Not
think you get
unless
the
we can
advantage.
tie it directly to another area where we have an opportunity to showcase our advantage. But the I don't understand all of the markets as well as you do, as others, but I don't see it happening anytime soon. But we're starting to run low on time, so let's move to slightly positive, more positive news. Are you aware that the laureate for the World Food Prize has been announced?
I saw that announcement. I am thrilled for the World Food Prize. They are, I got to meet a lot of really great people in the Office of Agricultural Policy doing, outreach to folks. It's one of my favorite organizations, right? Just getting to go to Des Moines and participate in that ceremony and just the seminars and everything was just was really inspiring, right? Sit there in the Iowa State Capitol and listen to the World Food Prize laureate. Just love that, right? It really reminded me of why I got into foreign policy and diplomacy and national security and all that, because that kind of work, soft power diplomacy, right? But incredibly powerful stuff that we do. essential to U.S. national security and our long-term interest, economic, diplomatic, you pick it, right? And so much happening there in Iowa that impacts the rest of the world. And so getting to know those folks, Michelle Hussein and her whole team, just loved getting to know folks there. So I thought it was fantastic, and I'm really glad to see that they are continuing to do well and get out there. I forget where they hosted it this year. I think it was in New York.
It was in New York City, yes.
Yeah, so I was just up in New York earlier this or last week, but they, I think they had a great event. I went out there last May for their laureate announcement at the Hall of Laureates in Des Moines, which was really nice. I'm glad to see they were able to get out to New York and do it this year. Shame the State Department's not hosting it like we used to, because this is truly one of the highlights, I think, of the year especially in terms of soft power diplomacy for the United States. So,
yeah. So the laureate is Hub Lelyveld, and I'm going to do a little bit of I'm going to give a little bit more of a deep dive on him on our next episode. So it's been great talking with you, Paul. You want to give us a sign out?
Adam, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and we'll look forward to the next discussion that we have. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and I hope you all have a good day.